After I've read through my file of information, I'm going to start jotting some things down. Now, I'm one of those people that likes to handwrite things, but you need to develop your own way. If you're better using your computer or some sort of system to keep track of your notes, that's fine. But I usually start with my handwritten notes. And what I'll first do is go through my who, what, where, and when analysis so that I can get a better understanding of what's involved with my research. So you'll see what I did here was do the who, what, when, where. I identified Pia, what her status is. And you can see in my when, I've developed a timeline of events which may or may not be important for your research, not just for this project, but generally. However, it is a good way to solidify the sequence of events. Time usually plays a role in legal proceedings, so better to get in the habit of creating a timeline than not. Once I have that information down, I then move on to identify some of my keywords that I think are of importance, and also keep track of any primary starting points. In this case, statutes. We were given some statutes that we'll need to look at. So you'll see the keywords that I've identified, and they might change over time. My plan will become much more sophisticated as I do more and more of my research. And you'll see the statutes that I've noted. Even at this stage, I already have some preliminary questions. For example, what is a crime of moral turpitude? What is that anyway? And I'm told in the information that courts usually use the categorical approach when analyzing this type of problem. What is the categorical approach? The next thing I'm going to do is go and look at the statutes. So I'm not going to look at all of them with you. I'm just going to give you some ways to move forward. I'm going to take a look at 8 U.S.C. 1182 and remind you about some of the ways you can manipulate your services to get better information. And also to remind you that it's very important to read a statute in a particular way and not to forget to look at all of the statutes around the one that you're looking at. Okay, so let's take a look at the statute. Now, I know most of us consider Lexis Advance a poor cousin to Westlaw, but there are some good features, and I'd like to remind you about using your statutory databases on Lexis. So first, remember, here's the currency statement here. That doesn't mean that that was the last time this statute was updated. It just means that this was the last update to the database. And Lexis does make it easy to see the history of the statute. If you use the Go-To feature here and go to History, you can see all of the amendments this statute has had. It has quite a long history. This is important. We need to check to make sure that the statute has not changed during the time period that we're concerned with for Pia and all of her activities. So we come down to the bottom and we see, fortunately, the last amendment being on 2013. So this is the version of the statute we are going to be working with, and we don't have to take any extra steps to make sure we are reading and interpreting the right version of the statute. So we are specifically interested in A to A. So here's A, here's 1. Let's go down to 2. 2, A, little I, big I. Okay, so we found our statute. This is what we are concerned with. And generally it's saying if you have been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, you are inadmissible. And then if we look a little bit further here in 2, there are exceptions. So the moral turpitude clause won't apply if the crime was committed when the person was a minor. So our timeline would come into play here. There's also some other time requirements with that exception. And there's a maximum penalty, so we'd have to go back and look at the Hawaii Revised Statutes to see what the penalty phases were as well, to see if this applies. And then if we could wipe out even just one of them, Pia would be in a better shape. But our job is to make sure that neither of her previous offenses are crimes of moral turpitude, and thus invalidating her removal order. Okay, so reading the statute is very important. And one of the questions I had was, what is a crime of moral turpitude? And you remember, we always want to look to see if there are definitions in the statute or the related regulations. We can take a look at the table of contents to see if there's a definition section. We are in chapter 12, and we only go up to 1181 in this table of contents, so we want to view the full table of contents for chapter 12. And if we open up that plus sign, general provisions, there is a definitions chapter, so we'll need to take a look at that to see if it sheds any light on whether these crimes are crimes of moral turpitude, because that seems to be what everything hinges upon. So you'll need to go to that section and review the definitions to see if we have a definition that could help us. Okay, so I won't waste your time going through a list. I'm sure you can manage that on your own. All right, I'm going to jump over to Westlaw to look at the statute on Westlaw. And we see here that West has identified some questionable treatment, one being a case from the Ninth Circuit, from a district court in Oregon in the Ninth Circuit, Doe v. Trump, that has limited this on constitutional grounds. So you should go and look at that and see if it has anything to do with our particular research project. Again, here is our statute and the language that we'll be dealing with. Unlike Lexis, Westlaw will link you to appropriate federal regulations that have to do with this statute. But remember, it's a very large statute. There are different categories of aliens that they're addressing, so the regulations may not be particular to our specific situation. In the context and analysis, you can open it, but you won't have any filtering mechanisms. And as you can see, there's been a lot written about this section, and we'll need to use our filters if we want to limit our citing references. I'm still looking for secondary sources. I don't know enough about this area, so I'm going to go to my citing references and open them up. There are over 90,000 of them, so we will certainly be limiting. Most of them are cases, as you see, but like I said, we're not there yet, and administrative cases. I want to take a look at the secondary sources. And remember that your filters will change depending on what source you're looking at. The ALR is a good friend of ours, so let's select the 153 American Law Report essays, and we could browse through them, or we could search within the results. So just as a reminder, if I'm searching for moral turpitude, okay, or CIMT, because my folder is telling me that that is a good abbreviation that we'll often see. And I'm going to check off this little box here that says, look for these terms in the same paragraph as the cited reference, meaning look for it in connection with 8 U.S.C. 1182 in the same paragraph. And going to hit continue, and remember, you need to click apply. All right, so just reminding you how to manipulate these resources. particularly when you're looking for secondary sources. We could scroll down and you could see which ones might be applicable. For example, here's this ineffective assistance. We were specifically told not to address that issue for PIA. We are not dealing with an aggravated felony, but this one looks promising. Okay, that one looks promising. So there are 39 ALRs. You can do this for the different types of secondary sources. So I'm still in the phase of finding secondary sources. I have my ALR, but I would like to see treatises to bring this discussion together a little bit more for me. There's a lot of case law. I don't want to slog through it. I don't really like reading law reviews to actually learn the law. So we're going to go take a look at how we can find treatises that will help explain crimes of moral turpitude as being grounds for inadmissibility for PIA. If we go back to the main page of Westlaw, we can go to our treatises by clicking on secondary sources, selecting texts and treatises, and then using our topic filter to limit this to immigration and hitting apply. So right now I'm looking both at encyclopedias and texts and treatises. If I deselect that, I'm just looking at the texts and treatises. So you'll need to make that decision for yourself. Oh, here we jump down to just 30 resources. And you could see, for example, if we went to immigration law and crimes or immigration law and defense, we could open up the chapters illegal entry, admission, and the reentry, deportability, and inadmissibility for crimes involving moral turpitude. So that looks great. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to read through this, start noting the cases that are being referenced. You could also select, so let's say you have a large treatise, you could select the box of the chapters that you want to search and then put your search terms in here, or just search the entire treatise. We were lucky, this one actually had a chapter that deals specifically with moral turpitude. We could do the same thing on Lexis. If we come back to the main page on Lexis, we could go through secondary sources like we did on West, or we can go through the practice area. So if we go to immigration, and we could see the treatises, practice guides, and jurisprudence here. They're highlighting these, but if you want to see all of them, you can open up that link, and all of the treatises that would be applicable to immigration research will be listed there. So you might say, well, there are a lot of treatises out there. I don't know which ones to pick. So I'm going to show you some resources at the law library that could help point you in the right direction. I'm going back to the law library's main page, and here under research guides, the A to Z list of guides, if we open that up, there are two that I want to highlight. One is a research guide on immigration law. So if we open up that, you'll find a lot of helpful resources, articles, records, but here, if we're looking for treatises, some of the better treatises have been highlighted on both Westlaw and Lexis, and also Bloomberg Law, which we haven't really used in this class, and you're not expected to master that. So these treatises were selected by the library as being very helpful in this area. if I go back to the list of guides, under the T's, there's one called Treatises in Electronic Resources. This is also organized by subject, and if you go to immigration, of course, you will have some of the selected immigration treatises on Lexis and Westlaw that the librarians are referencing for you and recommending to you. So collecting some of these secondary sources, reading the chapters in the treatises, the ALRs, that's the next thing you need to do. And then you're going to revisit your plan and start working on your primary law to help make the point that you are trying to make in your memo. So if you haven't already, you should start planning that research guide and identifying the secondary sources that are helping inform you. Remember, you have to write a reflection in addition to your memo and your research guide. So you want to keep track of the material that you're finding most helpful. I've spent some time looking over the secondary sources that I found so far, and I've taken a lot of notes and thought about how I'm going to approach this research problem. My handwritten notes at this point are becoming quite messy, as you can see. So I'm ready to transfer what I've learned so far and come up with a more sophisticated research document so I don't lose track of anything and I have a structured approach to be efficient about my research. So as you can see here, I've transferred my who, what, and where. I've added and sort of altered the language. My who has expanded. I realize there's an immigration court involved and these two executive agencies and the information on their web pages might be helpful. I've kept my timeline because after reading the statute, I realized there might be some benefit to having this timeline. My keywords I've modified a bit. I've added child endangerment and theft, realizing that I'll probably have to look at those crimes in Hawaii. I still have these questions, right? What is a crime of moral turpitude? What is the categorical approach? I learned of also a modified categorical approach. And how are these underlying convictions treated under this approach? I'm also wondering about the relationship between the immigration court and the judiciary, particularly in the Ninth Circuit and with the U.S. Supreme Court. So basically what I've decided is that I have 4 little mini research plans, at least I do to date, and they might converge at some point or I might have more, but this is where I am right now, and you can see them on the screen. I'm going to just go through the first one, what is a CIMT, with some suggestions, which the process you could replicate for these issues or however you're approaching your research path for this problem. So with the secondary sources, I used the KeyCite and secondary filters to look at some treatises and the American Law Reports, both of which were West products and are recommending this key number for this type of research, which I will be using particularly with my case law research. And I am getting some cases from the secondary sources, as well as an understanding that a crime of moral turpitude doesn't really have an exact definition. And I'm thinking this is where the categorical approach comes in, though I'm not exactly sure how that works just yet. That's going to be the topic of my next mini research project. So another thing I get out of my secondary sources is that they refer you to other things. So this Immigration Law and Crimes treatise referred me to the State Foreign Relations Manual, which was very interesting because it lists all different types of crimes of moral turpitude and what are common ones and what is required generally when the State Department is looking at crimes of immigrants and permanent residents who are seeking reentry. So you're going to go through this for all of the little sub-issues you identify. I like to keep my sub-issues separate so it doesn't become so overwhelming, and I would recommend the same to you. If there's a way for you to divide them up a bit, it doesn't get so overwhelming. Many of your resources will overlap, but that's okay. And if you're okay with having just a larger research project in front of you, if that's what works for you, that's fine. I just don't think it's a good way to start, particularly for new attorneys. So the next thing we're going to do is just review some of your case law finding techniques. And I'm going to go on to, or back to Westlaw and look at the statute. So we already looked at citing references with respect to secondary sources, but we can also use it to look at cases. Now, there are over 10,000 cases, almost 11,000 cases referenced here, and you can use your filters to filter out those outside of your jurisdiction or of other non-precedential setting status. But I want to remind you that there are these notes of decisions, and these cases are organized by common topics that attorneys are looking at when they're looking at this statute. So I advise you to go through these classifications to see if any of your little sub-issues meet the description of these categories. For example, criminal convictions. Are we interested in criminal convictions? Yes, we have criminal convictions. Are there categories specifically for moral turpitude? Yes, there are categories for moral turpitude, and there's more than one. So you would go into these categories, and we did this in class where we reviewed the cases. Try to find one in your jurisdiction that's binding, or find one where you like the way the court is talking about your issue if you're using it for research purposes. Another way you can jumpstart your case law research is if you are referred to a case in your secondary authority. One of the cases that was referenced in the secondary authorities that I was reading was at 104 F Sup 384, and it was a district court case in the Ninth Circuit. So not exactly precedential, but you can look at cases to learn more about the area and learn about the head notes that are referenced here. So this is a very old case, 1952. So one thing to remember is that the statute does get renumbered, so the numbering of the statute might be different in the opinion. Don't let that throw you off. And then the process is like we went through in class. We're looking at the head notes. If we were going to use this case, we'd be more concerned about the cases that cite back to this case and how it was treated. But if we are moving forward with our research, we might use this moment to collect our West Digest topics and key numbers, or start collecting them. So here is the Digest topic and key number for crimes of moral turpitude under the Digest topic Aliens, Immigration, and Citizenship. And remember, if you click on it, then it will rerun the search in the jurisdiction of the case that you were looking at. So here you see we're still in the Ninth Circuit, and we have a number of cases. This one most recent, okay, because right now I have it sorted by date, which could be interesting to see what the most current analysis is for that Digest topic and key number. We also can sort by the most cited if we're looking for cases that have a lot of traction. Okay, so we were given Digest topics and key numbers through our secondary sources and through the cases we were looking at. But I want to remind you that there is a full menu if you prefer to browse it. Going to the key numbers, we saw the digest topic was number 24, aliens, immigration, and citizenship. So not just immigration, right? It's aliens, immigration, and citizenship. And we can open that up and either search all of the content or browse through it. Right? We don't need to look for the digest topic. We already know that. We're looking for the appropriate key numbers, and we had looked at 272 under denial of admission and removal. So you might want to look through these to see if you have any additional key numbers that will help you for all of the little issues, little sub-issues involved. And remember, if you click on the key number here, you'll only get case results and you won't have any filters. But if you come back to the main screen and you type in your digest topic and key number, you'll get secondary sources as well as primary sources. I also want to remind you that you could add keywords to a digest topic and key number search. So if you wanted to add categorical approach and you only wanted to see cases that talked about this approach, you could easily do that. Don't forget to change the cases. So we have 114 cases, and we can use our filters to filter down to more specific cases or search within our results if you were looking for cases that talked about child endangerment, for example, and so on. So I'm going to leave Westlaw behind. I just reviewed a lot of what we did in class on our worksheets when we were talking about cases. If I take a case over to Lexis, for example, this is that same case, and I see it has a red signal. I look over to the Shepherds and I see that there was subsequent appellant history. So this case is slated for an en banc proceeding, and that is why it has a red flag. If you were going to cite it, of course, you would pursue the shepherdizing aspect of your research. But if you're still looking for cases and looking to see how the courts are treating the issue, on Lexis we don't have the digest topics and key numbers. We're going to be looking at these head notes and taking advantage of more like this head note. And so that requires you to go down. Head note 2 deals with larceny and theft. So that might be of interest to you if you're researching the theft aspect of PIA's inadmissibility. And here are our head notes involving crimes of moral turpitude. So I could click on more like this head note to rerun the search based on this language. And you want to go through all of the head notes to see what else is out there. Because it's not as structured as Westlaw, you'll want to read the head notes a little bit more carefully, and there might be more than one that will touch on what you're researching. And they also give you ideas for how you can approach your research. Like in head note 26, this last one, they're talking about when an alien is convicted under the divisible criminal statute and may have been convicted of a lesser crime that did not include an element of moral turpitude, the court errs on the side of under-inclusiveness, right? So saying that the interpretation here must be construed in the non-citizen's favor. So that would be important to know if you were preparing your argument for PIA or for anybody in this subject area. So finding a cases, you probably will at some point want to run a keyword search, and let me remind you to put your phrases in quotation marks and remember the order of procedure. So theft or child endangerment is read first here because it has the or connector. So go back, review your notes. I just want to caution you about some things using this main screen to search on Lexis. One, I've limited it to immigration law. There are all these different practice areas. So I'm comfortable with that, limiting it to immigration law. And that will help reduce the number of cases I have because moral turpitude does pop up in some other areas. And here, I want to point out, so you want to select, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court. And if you select all the federal courts of appeal, it's going to be hard to filter them on Lexis. So either leave it open to all and use your filters after the search, or if you feel comfortable excluding all of the other circuits, you can select the Ninth Circuit. I like to do a full search and then use the filters in my results to have a more deliberate set of cases. Okay, and just to remind you, your keywords do get color-coded if you can see those colors, and that they correspond to the color coding on the band of the abstract. The star means that is where it's talked about most heavily in the case. So it looks like this is talked about most heavily within the headnotes, and you see the abstract of the headnotes. I won't bother to go through all of the filters with you. I think we've done that plenty of times in class. Now I think it's up to you to use your superpowers, plan your research, start doing your research, go back, revise it, and follow that process until you're comfortable with your results and you start seeing the same types of cases and secondary sources referenced. We will be going over what you have done in a couple of weeks. I expect you to show up in our Zoom class with the beginnings, if not a fairly complete research document. And this way we can share problems that people have been having or great successes, which I hope you will all be having. Okay, so that's all I have for you. Get researching, and I will talk to you via Zoom next time around.